There once was a little kid whose growing horns made him think he was a grown-up billy goat and able to take care of himself. So one evening, when the flock started home from the pasture and his mother called, the kid paid no heed and kept on nibbling on the tender grass. A little later, when he lifted his head, the flock was gone. He was all alone. The sun was sinking. Long shadows came creeping over the ground. A chilly little wind came creeping with them, making scary noises in the grass. The kid shivered as he thought of the terrible wolf. Then he started wildly over the field, bleating for his mother. Not halfway, near a clump of trees across, there was the wolf. The kid knew there was little hope for him. "Please, Mr. Wolf," he said, trembling, "I know you're going to eat me, but first, please, pipe me a tune, for I want to dance and be merry for as long as I can." The wolf liked the idea of a little music before dinner, so he struck up a merry tune, and the kid leaped and frisked and danced around happily. Meanwhile, the flock was moving slowly homeward. In the still evening, in the air crisp and cold, the wolf's piping carried far. The shepherd dog picked up their ears. They recognized the song the wolf sings before a feast, and in just a moment they were racing back to the pasture. The wolf's song ended suddenly, and as he ran, with the dogs at his heels, he called himself a fool for turning to a piper to please a kid's ears, when he should have been a butcher instead. Do not let anything turn you from your purpose. The young crab and his mother. "Why in the world do you walk sideways like that?" said a mother crab to her son. "You should always walk straight forward with your toes turned out." "Show me how to walk, mother dear," answered the little crab obediently. "I wish to learn." So the old crab tried and tried and tried to walk straight forward. But she could only walk sideways, just like her son. And when she wanted to turn her toes out, she tripped and fell and bumped her nose. Do not tell others how to act unless you can set a good example. The frogs and the ox. An ox came down to a reedy pool to drink. As he splashed heavily into the water, he crushed a poor young frog into the mud. The old frog soon missed the little one, and asked his brothers and sisters what had become of him. "A great big monster," said one of them, "stepped on little brother with one of his huge feet." "Big was he," said the old frog, puffing himself up. "Was he as big as this?" "Oh, much bigger," they cried out. The frog puffed up even more. "He could not have been bigger than this," she said. But the little frogs all declared that the monster was much, much, much bigger, and the old frog kept puffing herself out more and more, and then, all at once, like a balloon, she burst. Pop! Do not attempt the impossible. The dog, the rooster, and the fox. A dog and a rooster, who were the very best of friends, wished very much to see something of the world. So they decided to leave the farmyard and to set out into the world along the road that led to the woods. The two comrades traveled along in the very best of spirits, and without meeting any adventure worth noting. At nightfall, the rooster, looking for a place to roost, as was his custom, spied nearby a hollow tree that he thought would do very nicely for the night's lodging. The dog could creep inside, and the rooster would fly up on one of the branches. So said, so done, and both slept very comfortably. With the first glimmer of dawn, the rooster awoke. For the moment, he forgot just where he was. He thought he was still in the farmyard, where it had been his duty to arouse the household at daybreak. So, standing on tiptoes, he flapped his wings and crowed lustily. But instead of awakening the farmer, he awakened a fox not too far off in the wood. The fox immediately had rosy visions of a very delicious breakfast. Hurrying to the tree where the cock was roosting, he said very politely, "A hearty welcome to our woods, honored sir. I cannot tell you how glad I am to see you here. I am quite sure we shall become the closest of friends." "I feel highly flattered, kind sir," replied the cock slyly. "If you will please go round to the door of my house at the foot of my tree, my porter will let you in." The hungry but unsuspecting fox went around the tree as he was told, and in the twinkling the dog seized him. Those who try to deceive may expect to be paid in their own coin. Belling the cat. The mice once called a meeting to decide on a plan to free themselves of their enemy, the cat. At least, they wished to find some way of knowing when she was coming, so they might have time to run away. Indeed, something had to be done, for they lived in such constant fear of her claws that they hardly dared stir from their dens by day or night. Many plans were discussed, but none of them were thought good enough. At last, a very young mouse got up and said, "I have a plan that seems very simple, but I know it will be successful. All we have to do is hang a bell around the cat's neck. When we hear the bell ringing, we will know immediately that our enemy is coming." All the mice were very much surprised that they had not thought of such a plan before. But in the midst of rejoicing over the good fortune, an old mouse arose and said, "I will say that the plan of the young mouse is very good. But let me ask one question. Who will put the bell on the cat?" It is one thing to say something that should be done. It is quite another matter to do it. The eagle and the jackdaw. An eagle, swooping down on powerful wings, seized a lamb in her talons and made off with it in her nest. A jackdaw saw the deed, and his silly head was filled with the idea that he was big and strong enough to do as the eagle had done. With so much rustling of feathers and a fierce air around him, he came down swiftly on the back of a large ram. But when he tried to rise again, he found that he could not get away, for his claws were tangled in the wool. And so far was he from carrying away the ram, that the ram hardly noticed he was there. The shepherd saw the fluttering jackdaw and at once guessed what had happened. Running up, he caught the bird and clipped its wings. The evening, he gave the jackdaw to his children. "What a funny bird this is," they said, laughing. "What do you call it, father?" "This is a jackdaw, my children. But if you should ask him, he would say that he is an eagle." Do not let your vanity make you overestimate your power. The Boy and the Filberts. A boy was given permission to put his hand into the pitcher to get some filberts, but he took such a great fistful that he could not draw his hand out again. There he stood, unwilling to give up a single filbert, and yet unable to get them all out at once. Vexed and disappointed, he began to cry. "My boy," said his mother, "be satisfied with half the nuts that you've taken, and you will easily get your hand out. Then perhaps you may get some more nuts at another time. Do not attempt too much at once." Hercules and the Wagoner. A farmer was driving his wagon along a miry country road after a heavy rain. The horses could hardly drag the load through the deep, deep mud, and at last came to a standstill when one of the wheels broke and the hub sunk into a rut. The farmer climbed down from his seat and stood beside the wagon, looking at it without making the least effort to get it out of the rut. All he did was curse his bad luck and called loudly on Hercules to come to his aid. Then, it is said, Hercules really did appear, saying, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, man, and urge your horses. Do you think you can move the wagon simply by looking and whining about it? Hercules will not help you unless you make some effort to help yourself." And when the farmer put his shoulder to the wheel and urged his horses, the wagon moved readily, and soon the farmer was riding along in great content and with a good lesson learned. Self-help is the best help. The Kid and the Wolf. A frisky young kid had been left by a herdsman on the thatched roof of a sheep shelter to keep him out of harm's way. The kid was browsing near the edge of the roof when he spied a wolf and began to jeer at him, making faces and abusing him to his heart's content. "I hear you," said the wolf, "and I haven't the least grudge against you for what you say or do. When you are up there, that's the roof talking, not you. Do not say something at any time that you would not say at all times." The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. A town mouse once visited a relative who lived in the country. For lunch, the country mouse served wheat stalks, roots, and acorns, with a dash of cold water for drink. The town mouse ate very sparingly, nibbling a little of this and a little of that, and by her manner making it very plain to see that she simply ate the food only to be polite. After the meal, the friends had a long talk, or rather, The town mouse talked about her life in the city, while the country mouse listened. And then they went to bed in a cozy nest in the hedgerow, and slept in quiet comfort until morning. In her sleep, the country mouse dreamed that she was a town mouse, with all the luxuries and delights of city life that her friend had described for her. The next day, when the town mouse asked the country mouse to go home with her to the city, she gladly said yes. When they reached the mansion in which the town mouse lived, they found a table in the dining room and the leavings of a very fine banquet. There were sweetmeats and jellies and pastries and delicious, delicious cheeses. Indeed, the most tempting foods that a mouse can imagine. But just as the country mouse was about to nibble a dainty little bit of pastry, she heard a cat mew loudly and scratch at the door. In great fear, the mice scurried to a hiding place, where they lay quite still for a long time, hardly daring to breathe. When at last they ventured back out to the feast, the door opened suddenly, and in came the servants to clear the table, followed by the house dog. The country mouse stopped in the town mouse's den only long enough to pick up her carpet bag and umbrella. "You may have luxuries and dainties that I have not," she said as she hurried away, "but I prefer my plain food and simple life in the country, where the peace and security go along with it." Poverty with security is better than plenty in the midst of fear and uncertainty. The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again and again he tried in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am, wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth jumping for." And he walked off very, very scornfully. There are many who pretend to despise and belittle what is beyond their reach. The Bundle of Sticks. A certain father had a family of sons who were forever quarreling among themselves. No words he could say did the least amount of good. So he cast about in his mind for some very striking example that should make them see that discord would lead to misfortune. One day, when the quarreling had begun much more violent than usual, and each of the sons was in a moping and surly manner, he asked them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle to each of his sons, he told them to try and break it. But although each one tried his best, none was able to do so. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one. This they did very easily. "My sons," said the father, "do you not see how uncertain it is that if you agree with each other and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to injure you? But if you are divided among yourselves, you will be no stronger than a single stick in that whole bundle." In unity, there is strength. The wolf and the crane. A wolf had been feasting too greedily, and a bone had struck in the crosswise of his throat. He could get it neither up nor down, and of course, he could not eat a thing. Naturally, this was an awful state of affairs for a greedy, greedy wolf. So away he hurried to the crane, and he was sure that she, with her long neck and bill, would easily be able to reach the bone and pull it out. "I will reward you very handsomely," said the wolf, "if you pull that bone out for me." The crane, as you can imagine, was very uneasy about putting her head in the wolf's throat, but she was grasping in nature, so she did what the wolf asked her to do. When the wolf felt that the bone was gone, he started to walk away. "But what about my reward?" called the crane anxiously. "What?" snarled the wolf, whirling around. "Haven't you got it? Isn't it enough that I let you take your head out of my mouth without snipping it off?" Expect no reward for serving the wicked. The ass and his driver. An ass was being driven along a road leading down the mountainside, when he suddenly took it into his silly head to choose his own path. He could see his stall at the foot of the mountain, and to him the quickest way down seemed to be over the edge of the nearest cliff. Just when he was about to leap over, his master caught him by the tail and tried to pull him back. But the stubborn ass would not yield, and pulled with all his might. "Very well," said the master. "You go your way, you willful beast, and see where it leads you." And with that he let go, and the foolish ass tumbled head over heels down the mountainside. They who will not listen to reason, but stubbornly go their own way against the friendly advice of those who are wiser than they, are on the road to misfortune. The oxen and the wheels. A pair of oxen were drawing a heavily loaded wagon along a miry country road. They had to use all their strength to pull the wagon, but they did not complain. The wheels of the wagon were of a different sort. Though the task they had to do was very light compared to that of the oxen, they creaked and groaned at every turn. The poor oxen, pulling with all their might to draw the wagon through the deep mud, had their ears filled with the loud complaining of the wheels. And this, you may well know, made their work so much harder to endure. "Silence!" the oxen cried out at last, all out of patience. "What have you wheels to complain about so loudly? We are drawing the weight, not you, and you are keeping still about it besides." Those who complain the most suffer the least. The lion and the mouse. A lion lay asleep in a forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her fright and haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. Roused from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tiny creature to kill her. "Spare me," begged the mouse. "Please, let me go, and some day I will surely repay you." The lion was very much amused to think that a mouse could ever help him. But he was generous, and finally let the mouse go. Some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was all caught up in the toils of a hunter's net. able to free himself, he filled the forest with his angry roaring. The mouse knew the voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she gnawed on it until it parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you see that even a mouse can help a lion. A kindness is never wasted." The Shepherd Boy and the Wolf. A shepherd boy tended to his master's sheep near a dark forest not far from the village. Soon he found life in the pasture very dull. All he could do to amuse himself was talk to his dog or play on his shepherd's pipe. One day, as he sat watching the sheep in the quiet forest and thinking what he should do, should he see a wolf, he thought of a plan to amuse himself. His master had told him to call for help should a wolf attack the flock, and the villagers would drive it away. So now, though he did not see anything that even looked like a wolf, he ran towards the village, shouting at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf!" And, as he expected, the villagers who heard the cry dropped their work and ran in great excitement to the pasture. But when they got there, they found the boy doubled up with laughter at the trick he had played on them. A few days later, the shepherd boy again shouted, "Wolf! Wolf!" And again the villagers ran to help him, only to be laughed at again. Then, one evening, as the sun was setting down behind the forest and the shadows were creeping out over the pasture, a wolf really did spring from the underbrush and fall upon the sheep. In terror, the boy ran towards the village shouting, "Wolf! Wolf! Wolf!" But though the villagers heard the cry, they did not run to help him as they had before. "He can't fool us again," they said. The wolf killed a great many of the boy's sheep and then slipped away into the forest. Liars are not to be believed, even when they speak the truth. The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat flew over the meadow with much buzzing for so small a creature and settled on the tip of one of the horns of a bull. After he had rested a short time, he made ready to fly away, but before he left, he begged the bull's pardon for having used his horn for a resting place. "You must be very glad to have me go now," he said. "It's all the same to me," replied the bull. "I didn't even know you were there." We are often of greater importance in our own eyes than in the eyes of others. The Planetree. Two travelers, walking in the noonday sun, sought the shade of a wide-spreading tree to rest. As they lay, looking up among the pleasant leaves, they saw it was a plane tree. "How useless is this plane," said one of them. "It bears no fruit whatsoever, and only serves to litter the ground with leaves." "Ungrateful creatures," said a voice from the plane tree. "You lie here in my cooling shade, and yet you say I am useless. Thus, ungratefully, O Jupiter, do men receive their blessings." Our best blessings are often the least appreciated. The Farmer and the Stork. A stork of a very simple and trusting nature had been asked by a happy party of cranes to visit a field that had been newly planted. But the party ended dismally, with all the birds entangled in the meshes of a farmer's net. The stork begged the farmer to spare him. "Please let me go," he pleaded. "I belong to the stork family, who you know are honest birds of good character. Besides, I did not know these cranes were going to steal." "You may be a very good bird," answered the farmer, "but I caught you with the thieving cranes, and you will have to share the same punishment with them. You are judged by the company you keep." The sheep and the pig. One day, a shepherd discovered a fat pig in the meadow where his sheep were pastured. He very quickly captured the porker, which squealed and squealed at the top of its voice the moment the shepherd laid his hands on it. You would have thought, to hear the loud squealing, that the pig was being cruelly hurt. But in spite of its squeals and struggles to escape, the shepherd tucked his prize under his arm and started off to the butcher's in the marketplace. The sheep in the pasture were very much astonished and amused by the pig's behavior, and followed the shepherd and his charge to the pasture gate. "What makes you squeal like that?" asked one of the sheep. "The shepherd often catches and carries off one of us, but we should feel very much ashamed to make such a terrible fuss about it like you do." "That's all very well," replied the pig with a squeal and frantic kick. "When he catches you, he's only after your wool, but he wants my bacon. Whee!" It's easy to be brave when there is no danger. The travelers and the purse. Two men were traveling in company along the road when one of them picked up a well-filled purse. "How lucky I am," he said. "I have found a purse. Judging by its weight, it must be full of gold." "Do not say, 'I have found a purse,'" said his companion. "Say rather, 'We have found a purse, and how lucky we are.' Travelers ought to share alike the fortunes and misfortunes of the road." "No, no," replied the other angrily. "I found it, and I am going to keep it." Just then they heard a shout, "Stop! Thief!" and looked around and saw a mob of people armed with clubs and pitchforks coming down the road. The man who had just found the purse fell into a panic. "We are lost if they find the purse upon us," he cried. "No, no," replied the other. "You would not say 'we' before, so now you have to stick to your 'I.' Say, 'I am lost.'" We cannot expect anyone to share our misfortunes unless we are willing to share our good fortunes as well. The Lion and the Ass. One day, as the lion walked proudly down a forest aisle, and the animals respectfully made their way for him, an ass brayed a scornful remark as he passed. The lion felt a flash of anger, but when he turned his head and saw who had spoken, he walked quietly on. He would not honor the fool with even so much as a stroke of his claws. Do not resent the remarks of a fool. Ignore them instead. The frogs who wished for a king. The frogs were tired of governing themselves. They had so much freedom that it had spoiled them, and they did nothing but sit around, croaking in a bored manner, and wishing for a government that could entertain them with the pomp and display of royalty, to rule them in a way to make them know that they were being ruled. No milk and water government for them, they declared. So they sent a petition to Jupiter, asking for a king. Jupiter saw what simple and foolish creatures they were, but to keep them quiet and make them think they had a king, he threw down a huge log which fell into the water with a great big splash. The frogs hid themselves along the reeds and grasses, thinking the new king to be some fearful giant. But they soon discovered how tame and peaceable King Log was. In a short time, the younger frogs were using him for a diving platform, while the older frogs made him a meeting place where they complained loudly to Jupiter about the government. To teach the frogs a lesson, the ruler of the gods now sent a crane to be the king of Froglandia. The crane proved to be a very different sort of king from old King Log. He gobbled up the poor frogs left and right as soon as he saw what fools they had been. In mournful croaks, they begged Jupiter to take away the cruel tyrant before they should all be destroyed. "How now?" cried Jupiter. "Are you not yet content? You have what you asked for, and so you only have yourselves to blame for your misfortunes. Be sure you can better your condition before you seek to change it." The Owl and the Grasshopper. The owl always takes her sleep during the day. Then, after sundown, when the rosy lights fade from the sky and the shadows rise slowly through the woods, out she comes, ruffling and blinking from the old hollow tree. Now her weird hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo echoes through the quiet wood, and she begins her hunt for bugs and beetles and frogs and mice that she likes very much to eat. Now, there was a certain old owl who had become very cross and hard to please as she grew older, especially if anything disturbed her daily slumbers. One warm summer afternoon, as she dozed away in her den in an old oak tree, a grasshopper began a joyous but very raspy song. Out popped the old owl's head from the opening in the tree that served both as a door and a window. "Get away from here, sir," she said to the grasshopper. "Have you no manners? You should at least respect my age and leave me to sleep in quiet." But the grasshopper answered saucily that he had as much right to place in the sun as the owl did in the old oak. Then he struck up an even more loud and raspy tune. The wise old owl knew quite well that it would do no good to argue with the grasshopper, nor with anybody else for that matter. Besides, her eyes were not sharp enough by day to permit her to punish the grasshopper as he deserved. So she laid aside all hard words and spoke very kindly to him. "Well, sir," she said, "if I must stay awake, I am going to settle right down and enjoy your singing. Now that I think of it, I have a wonderful wine here, sent me from Olympus, which, I'm told, Apollo drinks before he sings to the high gods. Please, come up and taste this delicious drink with me. I know it will make you sing like Apollo himself." The foolish grasshopper was taken in by the owl's flattering words. Up he jumped to the owl's den, but as soon as he was high enough so that the old owl could see him, she pounced upon him and ate him up. Flattery is not proof of true admiration. The Wolf and His Shadow. A wolf left his lair one evening in fine spirits and an excellent appetite. As he ran, the setting sun cast a shadow far out on the ground, and it looked as if the wolf was 100 times bigger than he really was. "Why," exclaimed the wolf proudly, See how big I am. Fancy me running away from a puny lion. I'll show him who's fit to be king, him or I." Just then, an immense shadow blotted him out entirely, and the next instant, a lion struck him down with a single blow. Do not let your fancy make you forget reality. The oak and the reeds. A giant oak stood near a brook in which grew some slender reeds. When the wind blew, the great oak stood proudly upright, with its hundreds of arms lifted up to the sky. But the reeds bowed low to the wind and sang a sad, mournful song. "You have no reason to complain," said the oak. "The slightest breeze that rustles the surface of the water makes you bow your heads, while I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling tempest." "Do not worry about us," replied the reeds. "The winds do not harm us. We bow before them so that we do not break. You, in all your pride and strength, have so far resisted their blows, but the end is coming." As the reeds spoke, a great hurricane rushed out of the north. The oak stood proudly and fought against the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled in fury, and all at once the great tree fell, torn up by its roots, and lay among the pitying reeds. Better to yield when it is folly to resist than to resist stubbornly and be destroyed. The rat and the elephant. A rat was traveling along the king's highway. He was a very proud rat, considering his small size and bad reputation all rats had. As Mr. Rat walked along, he kept mostly to the ditch. He noticed a great commotion up the road, and soon a grand procession came in view. It was the king and his retinue. The king rode on a huge elephant, adorned with the most gorgeous trappings. With the king in his luxurious houdah were the royal dog and cat. A great crowd of people followed the procession. They were all so taken up with admiration of the elephant, and the rat was not noticed. His pride was hurt. "What fools!" he cried. "Look at me, and you will soon forget that clumsy elephant. Is his size so great to make your eyes pop out? Or is it that wrinkled hide? Why, I have eyes and ears and as many legs as he. I'm of just as much importance, and another thing." But just then the royal cat spied him, and in the next instant the rat knew he was not quite as important as an elephant. A resemblance to the great in some things does not make us great. The boys and the frogs. Some boys were playing one day at the edge of a pond in which lived a family of frogs. The boys amused themselves by throwing stones into the pond so as to make them skip on top of the water. The stones were flying thick and fast, and the boys were enjoying themselves very much. But the poor frogs in the pond were trembling with fear. At last, one of the frogs, the oldest and bravest, put his head out the water and said, "Oh, please, dear children, stop your cruel play. Though it might be fun for you, it means death to us." Always stop to think whether your fun may be the cause of another's unhappiness.